In our next session now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be hearing about gender equality in Asia by diving into the newest findings related to diversity, inclusion, and gender equality from the UN Global Compact's latest studies. Now, our panel is going to be led by Shahamin Zaman, the Executive Director of the Global Compact Network in Bangladesh. However, just before I hand over to Zaman, let's get this really special call to action from Suwatthi Kandiah, who is, of course, the Assistant Manager looking after employer brand and diversity and inclusion for diesel and motor engineering.
Wait a minute. Is that the look of confusion on your faces? Did you not understand the previous segment? Well, since we are gathered here today to speak about gender equality and diversity, I wanted you to step into the shoes of those people who feel confused and completely excluded from conversations on a daily basis among friends, families, and even at the workplace. I hope in that 1 minute of silence, you were able to capture the challenges of intersectionality that demands our attention now more than ever. According to the ILO, 60% of people with disabilities are of working age, and they experience an unemployment rate of 80 to 100% higher than that of non-disabled workers. Out of this, unemployment rates for women with disabilities is almost as twice as much as men with disabilities. This shows that people do not just face one form of discrimination, such as gender, but there are so many intersecting factors which impede their basic rights. For instance, discrimination against women of color, women with a sexual orientation, disabled women, indigenous women, pregnant women, and so on. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Suwatthi Kandiah from Sri Lanka, and I work for one of the country's largest conglomerates, Diesel and Motor Engineering PLC, also known as DIMO. My work with DIMO is largely focused on driving equality, creating conducive work environments, and fostering inclusion. DIMO is often stereotyped as a masculine organization because of our deep-rooted experience in the automobile and engineering industry. However, we firmly believe that we cannot ignore 50% of our potential employees and 50% of our customers who are women. One of the key actions that I have been involved at DIMO in advancing workplace inclusion is the launch of DIMO's Employee Resource Group. This acts as a platform to spur conversations around gender equality, respectful workplace practices, and male allyship among employees and the organization's senior leaders. This initiative has led to a 5% increase in women in leadership roles within a span of just 1 year. In addition to DIMO's continuous efforts in advancing inclusivity and diversity, we this year joined UNGC's Target Gender Equality Accelerator Program, and I am proud to say that DIMO has already set an ambitious target to increase women in decision-making roles from 10% to 40% by 2025. As a strong advocate for achieving equity, I represent DIMO in UNGC's Sri Lankan Gender and Diversity Working Group. This has been an incredible platform to learn local and global best practices, share our success stories, and collaborate with multiple organizations who are all marching towards an inclusive future. My hope for this network is to reach more businesses of all kinds and sizes across Sri Lanka and encourage them to set ambitious targets towards enhancing women's economic empowerment. Let me ask you for something before I conclude. I want you all to imagine yourselves as Nobel Prize winners. Close your eyes, imagine. You've done something so great to increase women's labor force participation. You've increased the economic participation of women of color, women with disabilities, indigenous women, pregnant women, and women with sexual orientation. You've not just included them, but you've made work possible for them and consciously rooted for their progress. There's a difference. This is exactly why you've been awarded with the Nobel Prize. Open your eyes. How does it feel to have contributed to something so truly magnanimous? Go do it. This is my call to action for you. Because you and I, we have the power. The power to raise our voice, the power to make innovations, the power to make real change towards something the world has been so desperately fighting for. So let it flow. Let your power flow.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this plenary session of Target Gender Equality in Asia. We are so delighted to have you on board. And what an amazing, amazing video, Call for Action by Suwatthi from Sri Lanka. It's amazing that what diversity and inclusion might mean. I think you were wondering at the very beginning when the video came on that, okay, I don't know sign language, and how will I understand what Suwatthi is saying? But of course, that is what inclusion implies. We have to take into consideration those things that we always feel that are not part of our daily journey: gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. I'm Shahamin Zaman. I'm the Executive Director of Global Compact Network Bangladesh, and it's my immense pleasure to welcome you to our conversation today. The three topics are very, very engaging, and we focus on the Asian perspectives. We have about 5 countries represented in this session from around the world, and everybody's going to talk about the different perspectives from a small company to a large one, from a women-led business into global businesses. You will be able to hear from these distinguished panelists we have today. I will just say their names: Mohammad Naciri, Regional Director of UN Women; Elim Sritaba, Chief Sustainability Officer at Asia Pulp and Paper from Indonesia; and Gagandeep Bhullar, Founder and CEO at SuperHuman from India. Our discussion today evolves around a new data deep dive on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion that the UN Global Compact has initiated and launched based on inputs from a number of CEOs who are UNGC members. This survey will give you some idea of what is the disparity between gender. We will give you a sneak peek in today's session, but I encourage you all to go back and see the full brief live on our UNGC website. So if you are one of the 900 plus companies participating in the Global Compact's Target Gender Equality program, you will have the chance to dive into data that's more detailed throughout the program, as well as to learn how you can make a difference. How can you take holistic action for women leadership? Before we get started, I wanted to emphasize that non-discrimination is first and foremost a matter of fundamental human rights. But we are also encouraged by the growing amount of research globally, regionally, and locally that shows that ensuring a diverse and inclusive workforce and leadership are good for business. Not only that, it's a sustainability performance. But I want to also say that I want to stress that issues need to be top-down, bottom-up. We need to regard the issues of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion not only for one size of an organization or company. This can be integrated into any size, any sector, any country in operation. Our research finds that the smallest companies are setting ambitious targets. And we see that more and more this is resonating to other companies as well. So without much ado, let's dive into the details of the issues. But first, I must give you a short introduction of the panelists we have today. The three distinguished panelists, we have Mohammad Naciri, Regional Director, UN Women, Asia Pacific. Mohammad Naciri is the Regional Director who has brought close to 3 decades of experience working in international development organizations on peace, security, humanitarian response, human rights, and gender equality across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And he has worked in a number of UN organizations, including UNICEF, IOM, and UNDP, and has led teams all over the globe. He's a national of Morocco, and he holds a master's degree of public administration and international development from Harvard University, and has also a master's degree in social anthropology from Oxford University. Thank you for being with us, Mohammad, today. We look forward to the discussions. We have with us also Gagandeep Bhullar, founder and CEO of the SuperHuman Race Private Limited from India. Gagandeep is a technologist and entrepreneur. She founded the SuperHuman Race in India in 2016 with a vision to employ technology for creating a good society. The SuperHuman Race automates social purpose for companies in India and North America through the use of data analytics, gaming, and behavioral dynamics. SuperHuman Race translates into social and environmental impact into numbers through which the use of revolutionary modular design frameworks along with intensive data modeling. So she is currently serving in various United Nations core committees for sustainability leadership. Welcome, Gagandeep Bhullar, to this platform. I want to introduce our third panelist, who is here with us today. Elim Sritaba, Chief Sustainability Officer, Asia Pulp and Paper from Indonesia. Elim is the Chief Sustainability Officer, which is one of the leading forestry pulp and paper companies globally. She was responsible for leading the implementation of APP's forest conservation policy in Sinnar mass forestry since the launch in 2013. She currently serves on the board of Indonesian Global Compact Local Network and was previously the Director of Strategic Corporate Relation and Human Resource in Sinnar mass forestry. She has 20 years of experience across finance, forestry, as well as supply chain management and business strategy. Welcome to this platform, Elim Sritaba. So with this, I will start the question answer session, and I hope that some of you will those who are in the audience will use the chat box to give any questions to the panelists or give any comments. So let's start by talking about data, because data is very important. Without data, quantifying data, companies will not come forward. Our data suggests that diversity and inclusion initiatives have been fairly resilient during the pandemic. We saw that gradually, globally, we have seen that the pandemic has hit hard on everyone, especially on small businesses. Globally, 92% of the CEOs say they have ongoing diversity inclusion initiatives, but only 6% of the CEOs reported it in the pandemic, had said that they had negative impact on diversity and inclusive initiatives. So as I was saying, data is very relevant for companies to quantify change. And our data from the UNGC survey suggests that the diversity and inclusion initiatives have been fairly resilient during the pandemic. Globally, 92% of the CEOs say that they have ongoing diversity and inclusion initiatives, but only 6% has reported anything negative during the pandemic. These they have actually said that the setbacks were more towards skill development, equal pay, and community engagements. So my question, Elim, to you would be that your company actively participated in the research presented here today and have also committed publicly to the women's empowerment principles of the UN. So what more do you think could be done for companies not to view that diversity and inclusion initiatives are part of separate efforts, rather than take a holistic approach and understand the diversity implications across the policies and practices? So I would like to ask Elim to respond to that question. Thank you, Elim.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Shahamin. So it's my role as a Chief Sustainability Officer in my company, Asia Pulp and Paper in Indonesia. So I strongly encourage companies to integrate diversity and inclusion into DNA of the business. So we have included our D&I commitments into our Sustainability Vision 2030 as diversity and inclusion has a direct impact on our sustainability. So what we have been done, so basically we make a habit of investing in people, work both internally and in the community to advance D&I, produce role models, and normalize diversity and inclusion. So at APP, we advance all employees without discrimination to positions of all leadership based on capacity and ability, while also investing in empowerment programs at communities level. So a lot of initiative to promote D&I to ensure that we are not separate within our vision itself. So APP committed on women empowerment principles, and we already publicly. And I'm also currently part of the G20 Empower Advocate under Minister of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. And APP also committed to the target gender equality, and capacity building is important through workshop and other training to not only our employees, but also for the communities. And companies with successful D&I program to set examples, of course. And we believe that we do not tolerate any kind of harassment of discrimination or gender, ethnicity, religion, race, or disabilities, and also strive to protect employees' health and safety. So all of these initiatives we embedded to all our system within the company, and how we also socialize to ensure that each division within the company understood how to implement all these initiatives to promote D&I. So hope my question can explain your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Elim. That's fantastic. I think, what really strikes out to me is that role model. We have to create more role models in order to engage more companies, more of the communities and stakeholders involved. And thank you. That's a wonderful work that you're doing. And I can see that, like Indonesia is also working towards that transformation in gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm glad you're also in the advocacy scenario where you can make changes happen. So my next question is to Mohammad. For UN Women has published a lot of data. You have a lot of data, not only globally, but regionally and nationally, of course. And I would like to hear from you the research and tools highlighting the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on women, because we have heard it in various news media, the negative impacts of the pandemic on women and girls. Could you please outline how the female workforce has especially been impacted, and how you see businesses across the region take action despite these new obstacles that they're facing? What would be your reply, Mohammad, to you?
Thank you, Shahamin. The only continent worldwide where women's participation rate in the labor force has stagnated, if not fallen, is Asia. As many women have lost their jobs or had their salaries reduced as a result of COVID, this trend is likely to worsen. Because of COVID, the local labor market has shrunk, forcing people out of jobs and affecting women unfairly. Some 50% of women in informal employment reported working fewer hours compared to 35% of men. Women-owned small and micro enterprise have also been hit hard by COVID. As of April last year, 86% of women SME owners said they were negatively or very negatively affected. 75% said their caregiving responsibilities increased. 77% said they sold fewer projects and services, and 34% said they may have to close their business. COVID has deepened women's vulnerability. It had cost informal workers in the Asia-Pacific 22% of their income within the first month of the pandemic. With the lockdowns we saw in the earliest phases of the pandemic and which continue in some areas even today, we have also seen firsthand just how much unpaid domestic work is essential, regionally and internationally. Unfortunately, women shoulder most of the responsibility in this department. Our research found that 63% of women reported an increase in unpaid domestic work compared to 59% of men. In ASEAN, however, these discrepancies are more pronounced. As a result of the COVID crisis, 30% of women and 16% of men reported an increase in the duration and intensity of domestic work. South Asian women are less likely than men to have health insurance. Businesses and governments can design economic recovery packages that recognize and value unpaid care work and care jobs, provide adequate childcare and other care services, and engage men to share equally in unpaid care and domestic work. Additionally, businesses need to take steps to promote more women into senior leadership positions. Diversity in leadership is not only good for business, but it also ensures companies are responsive to the needs of their female employees and the communities where they work. Businesses have a critical role in enacting policies that support women's economic empowerment and ensuring that these efforts are measured, reported, and targeted towards the most important areas. Back to you, Shahamin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mohammad, for your insightful information. It's amazing to hear that, so many women, especially SMEs, have, during this pandemic has had negative impact. Thank you very much for that insight. So Asia Pacific has been struggling during this pandemic, and I hope that in the next few years, we try to recover better by working together as within these stakeholders. Now I'd like to go to Gagandeep. How has the pandemic especially affected women-owned businesses? Because as we heard from Mohammad, that like women in businesses have suffered immensely during the pandemic. Can you share some good practices of companies and the efforts that support women-led businesses through this supply chain practices and during this pandemic? So over to you, Gagandeep.
Thank you, Shahamin. So one of the things that I'm going to do is that I'm not going to, so there are three spaces, according to me, that exist within the development of women so that they can become equal partners with men in the economy. And those three are access, opportunity, and equity. So I think what Mohammad was mostly speaking to was access. And I want to focus more on opportunity. Equity would be political representation of women across the world, right? As we see more political leaders emerge. So I want to focus on the opportunity part of the spectrum. And I think as far as supply chain participation of women goes, so we heard a lot of great data points from Mohammad on, the number of SMEs that have gone out of business that were women-led and so on. I want to sort of build on that a little bit. So two critical data points that I think will bring a lot of interest in this conversation. So the first is that, an ILO conducted study, this was worldwide, and they spoke with people from 4 continents, 1,000 companies. And the realization was that small companies, small or medium companies, but mostly small companies, 70% companies either temporarily or permanently had to close operations. The interesting data point that goes alongside this, which is specific to, I think, India, is that, a lot of so we have about 14% of all entrepreneurs in India are women. Taking that one step further, 97.5% of all women-run businesses are in fact small businesses. So, as we look at any data point around the world, when we hear that, there are data points emerging that 163,000 businesses had to temporarily close down, 100,000 businesses due to the pandemic had to permanently close down, we have to remember the fact that 97.5% of these women-run businesses are in fact small businesses and require support. The other interesting data point that I want to highlight here that goes to the whole dialogue of, what are women, how are they placed within the supply chain? So Marriott is actually recognized as one of the best companies in the world for employing women-owned businesses. If this was an interactive session, I think we could have run a poll to find out what percentage of their supply base is actually women-owned. And the responses would have been, I would assume, that the normal person would think 25%, 33%. Startlingly, the number is in fact 2%. So the global average for women-owned businesses being integrated in the supply chain of large businesses is 1%. And Marriott, which is best in class, is at 2%. This is IFC data. So I think that this clearly represents the reality on the ground. It's sad, right? It is really, really sad. Mm-hmm. But I think good things are also happening. So, based on studies that have been conducted very recently, so 2020 data being compared against 2021 data, we are seeing that more companies, 29% companies in a Gartner study, committed to specific objectives in terms of bringing, women-owned businesses into the fold. And even there, in terms of commitment, we saw an increase from 46% to 68%. This is happening at the level of the commitments that they are making. I think in terms of the best practices that I have observed as a female founder and CEO of a company, one is that, there are companies who will ask the question about, what does your board look like and how many women do you have across your organization? I think both of these questions are very important because, again, if we look at the data and if we look at supply chain data for large companies, even during the pandemic, the number of women in the entry-level roles in the supply chain has been consistently increasing. But the number of women at the highest executive roles has in fact reduced. So we hit a dip in 2021, as recently as 2021, right? So this year. So I think asking these two questions
excuse
when
me,
they
Gagandeep,
start.
Excuse me, can we, sort of wrap up quickly because we
Sure.
want to go into some other questions as well? Thank you, Gagandeep.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So, So asking the question about representation, I think is important. Having incentives linked to women, to bringing women-owned businesses on board is important. And I think measuring the length of engagement and building those relationships with women-owned businesses so that they can evolve and become more competent, competitive is equally important. So these are sort of the three best practices that I would recommend that large companies adopt as they look at their supply.
Thank you, Gagandeep. That was very insightful. We're happy to hear that there are changes happening, but of course, there's a lot of accountability that we need to do. Bigger companies like MNCs need to consider women-led businesses into their supply chains. So that's, there is a lot of food for thought. We need to think how positively we can include women, and not only women. I just want to also say that we talk about inclusivity, we talked about diversity. One of the questions I just want to ask everybody, I want to give you 1 second to answer this, that what if you were asked a business in Asia region to implement a concrete action, what would that be? What are the ways inequalities can be tackled on a daily life for the workforce, for the communities at large? What would it be? So maybe my question first would be to Mohammad. What do you think? In 1 second, what is the first thing that comes into your mind?
Thank you, Shahamin. It's undeniable that women need to be empowered at every level of leadership, whether in all the spaces. However, as we often say, what is not measured cannot be achieved. So what I'm trying to advocate for here is to standardize measuring and reporting mechanisms that are crucial to monitor and track progress to performance. However, governments can encourage more transparent reporting methods, better accountability mechanisms, and gender-responsive business conduct by incentivizing the private sector. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you. That was very enlightening, Mohammad. What about Elim? What do you think? What would be the call for action for businesses to tackle these inequalities?
Yeah, thank you, Shahamin. So multi-stakeholder collaboration is really important to addressing inequalities issue. So of course, I agree based on Mohammad said that we have to have a monitoring system in place, and then how we can invest all these diversity and inclusion at the community levels, improving equality, by provide capacity building improvement for all of them, and how we can empower future leaders, not only within the company, but also in the community level. And then continue to campaign to increase the awareness on D&I and equality. And of course, advocacy to our government, laws and regulations. So I think this is all really important to push about the D&I and gender equality to achieve the target. So over to you back.
Definitely. Thank you, Elim. That's very interesting. And what about Gagandeep? Your last words. How would you take action? What should businesses do in Asia?
So I think what the call to action would be, do it with dignity, right? So I think we see a lot of initiatives across corporates where there are these grant programs. I think that women deserve to be equal partners, inviting them to supply chains, funding their businesses, showing that kind of faith is doing it with dignity, giving them grants or, sort of access is important, but that is not what businesses need to focus on. I think businesses need to, build the confidence of women by doing it with dignity, give them opportunities to advance, give them funding, make sure that their businesses are part of your supply chain. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a very intricate part, that working with SMEs, working for the next generation, working with women businesses into the supply chains. I think those are the areas that we need to tackle together for addressing gender inequality. We need to tackle for diversity and inclusion. On that count, let me just say thank you very much for all the three panelists, but we would like to say that the contributions will also resolve into action. We want to see a call for action. And here I want to just say that there's one area that we need to address is diversity and inclusion. So I have a message from our Executive Director of Global Compact Pakistan, who will give us some call to action, and followed by Bangladesh, a very famous Tashnuva Anan Shishir, who is a transgender, and she's an activist in Bangladesh, has led a lot of initiatives in the public domain. So I want to hand over and say that thank you all very much for listening to us, for joining us in this session, and we look forward to call to action, and we would like to hear from you more, how you're engaging, what are the future prospects you are doing in engaging in this critical agenda of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you all very much, and let's look at the video then. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is Fasil Karim Siddiqui, Executive Director, Global Compact Network, Pakistan. In Target Gender Equality has drawn a lot of enthusiasm. 10 companies which have signed to participate in this program. The important thing that I would like to mention in Pakistan is the enactment of the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2018. For the first time, this act recognizes the transgender persons in Pakistan and also recognizes equality of their treatment and employment and opportunities, and gives them equal rights. And one of the focus which the network is going to make is working on implementation of this act, so that the transgender people can also remove the cultural and infrastructural barriers.
Greetings from Bangladesh. I am Tashnuva Anan, a transgender rights activist working to ensure the rights of transgender people since 2016. It's my pleasure to convey a few of my words on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in businesses through this event. Like most of the world, despite going through an extraordinary crisis as the global pandemic, Bangladesh has great news available regarding the transgender community, as many events for the past 12 months have encouraged advancing transgender rights. For example, Bangladesh witnessed the first transgender nurse serving COVID-19 patients, the first transgender to lead COVID-19 dead body burial services, transgender inclusion in higher education, the government announcement of tax rebate for transgender inclusion in higher education, the government's announcement of tax rebate for transgender inclusion in businesses, and myself becoming the first transgender newscaster in Bangladesh. But there is yet much progress to be done. I acknowledge and appreciate that many businesses are willing to be inclusive, but also understand the current socio-cultural barrier for the companies to include transgender people. I have personally been discriminated against and missed out on growth opportunities several times because of my identity. When given the opportunity, we have proven ourselves over and over again that we indeed are capable. Yet it is hard to believe that only less than half of the companies globally say that they have taken action to ensure their leadership is accountable to diversity and inclusion targets. Only 38% of companies have publicly announced diversity and inclusion organizational targets. Only 1 in 10 companies globally conduct an annual review of diversity and inclusion investments. Globally, 6% of companies have linked executive remuneration to diversity and inclusion targets. I wish to urge various stakeholders to consciously increase their efforts in ensuring sustainable, transparent, and meaningful D&I practices. It is also critical to ensure that diversity and inclusion measures are not being taken through a tokenistic approach, and the underrepresented communities are properly consulted before jumping into an inclusion program, increasing efficiency and minimizing costs. The UNGC Target Gender Equality Accelerator Program is setting an excellent example in genuinely advocating for equality and sustainability in corporate spaces by providing businesses with the right tools and resources to help them achieve those goals. I'm happy to learn that the UNGC Local Network Bangladesh has agreed to run the second round of the Target Gender Equality Accelerator Program. By doing so, companies in Bangladesh will become more aware of the issue. And I believe the gender gap will decrease significantly in the coming years. With that spirit, let's start appreciating and embracing the diversity around us and strongly reflect our diversity and inclusion objectives in the planning, policy, and programs of businesses. Thank you.
An excellent conversation on diversity, inclusion, and gender equality, and of course, that resounding call to action that we've just heard.